Thanks for following the American Coalition for Ethanol. Donna Funk with KCoe Isom joins ACE for insight into the latest round of stimulus funding. Be sure to check out our website for more information on this and other ethanol resources. So Donna, what is going to look familiar to us in this package from previous rounds?
So I think there's several things that will look familiar, but yet have a little different twist on them. And that this package does have a second round of the Paycheck Protection Program, or the PPP, as we've all, affectionately come to call it. But there are some differences with it. There's also an extension of some of the sick and family leave tax credits that have been extended. Again, those probably look more the same as they did last time, just it extended, and they've been extended just through March 31st right now. So somewhat of a short extension on that piece of it. And then they also extended the employee retention tax credit. So that one got extended again through July of 2021, but it got extended with some differences. So, there's a few things that extended and stayed the same. And then, the PPP and the ERTC, those got extended, but extended with differences. So.
What are some of these new components that we should be paying attention to?
Yeah, exactly. So maybe if we start with the PPP, which is the one that's getting all of the publicity, and probably because it maybe is the one that's seen to have the most immediate impact. And some of the changes on that are they've changed the timing of who can apply and what banks are allowed to enter to start accepting applications based on size. So it started out earlier this week with what they call community financial institutions, which are just the really, really small financial institutions. And then today they are opening it up to banks under 1 billion in assets. And then early next week it will get opened up to all of the banks. So the thought there being some of the smaller banks and maybe businesses that work with those smaller banks that potentially either didn't know how to apply last time, or couldn't apply fast enough, that they're leaving the program open for them initially first, and then allowing some of the others in. So that's one of the changes that I think even the banks are somewhat struggling to deal with. It wasn't until just yesterday that they announced when the next two sets of banks were even going to get in. So, a lot of the banks were going, we don't know. We're going to participate, but we don't know when. Well, I think we now have a little bit of clarity around when. But the other changes to that program are they've reduced the size of companies that can participate. So unless you're in more of the restaurant hospitality space, that one's got a larger exemption for it. But otherwise, it's 300 or less employees. But also, you have to be able to show that you had a 25% decrease in gross receipts or gross revenue for any quarter of 2020 compared to that same quarter of 2019. And when they defined gross receipts, it's basically any revenue or income that you receive from any source. So it's not just your product sales, but it's interest income or dividend income, or if you sold some equipment or had a gain on some equipment sales, that's included as well. So it's a pretty broad definition. So that will, even though plants across the board had declines, if you were lucky enough that your decline was only 23%, well, you don't qualify because you didn't have a 25% decline. So there's going to be some plants that were eligible in the first round that won't be eligible here in the second round. The other changes, I would say, on the ERTC, or the employee retention tax credit. So I apologize for some of the abbreviations I use. We've just been throwing these around for so many months that the acronym and maybe not the full credit name. But that one, initially in round one, if you took a PPP loan, you could not get the ERTC credit. It was one or the other. And now they've said you can be eligible for the ERTC even if you got a first round PPP loan. You just have to be able to show that you had a 50% decline in gross receipts in one quarter compared to that same quarter of 2019. So again, there's a little bit more there for some of the plants that did shut down or really reduce their production to a much larger reduction, and we've seen some plants be able to take advantage of that. The extension of that credit for 2021 is if you can show that you had a 20% decline in gross receipts for a quarter in 2021 compared to 2019. So again, they're kind of just ignoring 2020 in there of saying we're not going to tell you you have to decline from your already declined levels, just declined from the quote normal of 2019, then you can be eligible for that tax credit in 2021. And they've increased the credit amount from 50% to 70%. And then have also said that wages won't be capped at the 10,000 limit, but will be 10,000 per quarter. So in essence, if you qualify and you have an employee that made 12,000 in the first quarter, you would be able to use 10,000 of their wages in the first quarter, and then you'd be able to do that again in the second quarter. Whereas before, that 10,000 was an annual limit, not a quarterly limit. So they've really tried to make that more beneficial to companies. And while it's not maybe as immediate of cash as a PPP, it is, it is a cash injection back into the business through a payroll tax credit.
Is there anything more in this that's specific to ethanol that we should just be aware of?
Yeah, I think there's a couple things in there. One that's gotten a little bit more, press or maybe awareness is the USDA does now specifically have authority to provide funds to the biofuels industry. There was nothing in the bill around what that should look like, just that there was guidance there authorizing it. So I think there's at least some hope that maybe something will come out of that. The other piece, a couple other things in there is there was a extension of the oil spill tax. So that, while that's not a benefit, but that is something folks need to be aware of, is that what has been extended for an additional 5 years. So that's more of a maybe reporting obligation that folks need to be aware of that was originally set to expire. And then they also, extended some of the other programs related to, the second generation biofuel producer tax credit, some of the alternative refueling property credits, 45Q and some of those others. They, extended those and or modified them to try to make them a little bit more attractive and beneficial for companies as well. So while that, again, that's not an immediate injection of cash, but it does at least keep those incentives out there that companies are looking for to be able to take themselves to that next level of producer.
I'm listening to this, and I'm a business, and I'm curious, and I want to proceed with an application. What's my next step, or maybe even what are some things I should be gathering? What pieces of information should I be gathering as I look at going to the application?
For the PPP program, if you're allowed to use either your 2019 payroll or your 2020 payroll, so you can pick which of those is the most advantageous for you. And if you are going to use 2019, which is what you would have used on your first round, the only thing that you should have to provide to the bank, in addition to the application, which the application itself is fairly simple, but you need to provide proof that you had that decline in gross receipts, which can be, an income statement for a quarter of this year showing last quarter, just something that demonstrates that you had a drop in your gross receipts. It's really all that's required for this round of the PPP application. So they have tried to keep that simple if you're going to use your 2019 payroll. If you're going to use 2020 because it happens to be more advantageous, then again, you would have to provide all that same payroll information that you had together last time, as far as documentation that shows you did pay that amount in wages, the number of employees and some of that stuff. So, some of them that we've looked at, if it's really close, we've went with 2019 because the documentation gathering is just so much less that, it wasn't worth the extra, $700 that we might have got in a PPP loan.
So we're really on the line here with the presidential transition. Do you see anything impacting this program when we see this change in administrations?
I don't know that it would change this program so much. We may see, a third round of the PPP. At some point though, you'd have to think that they can't just keep putting more money out there either. But what I do think this administration will do is may not be specifically COVID or stimulus related, but I do think this administration is going to be more focused on climate change and pushing those things out that I think the biofuels industry really can benefit from if we engage in it the right way. They may not do it directly at the fuel producer level. They may take it more through, say, farming practices. But as I know ACE has been very involved in that piece of it as well. So I think that could be a component where the industry can benefit as well by getting engaged. Additionally, I don't want to say starting, but getting more engaged in some of those conversations and working more with local producers. Again, some of that is speculation because we don't know what they're going to do, but I think it's pretty clear that climate and climate change is going to be a focus. And starting to hear more about low carbon fuel standards, whether that's state by state, regionally, or even hearing some potential talk of a national LCFS. Now, again, what a national one looks like, that will take a little time to develop, but I certainly think that will be some of the focus. So, a lot of the work that plants have been doing that are carbon focused and emission reduction, all of that I think is going to continue to be even more important. And the further they are today, that's that much more ahead they're going to be, even more so with the change in administration than they would be, if we hadn't had a change in administration, which is going to be important because I also think the new administration over time will look to increase, start to raise taxes. Again, what that looks like, whether that's through a direct increased tax rate or an elimination of, deductions. So it's easy to say, well, I didn't raise tax rates, but if you eliminated some deductions, well, you effectively raised taxes. It's all in how you look at that piece of it. But I do think those two things will both come with the new administration. Again, neither one will be immediate, but I think you'll see definite movement on those within, for sure within 2 years, and start to lay things out, I think, even in the first year.